Hi everyone, my name is Kevin Greene and you're very welcome along to my first contribution to this awesome festive tech calendar event. My session today is titled Top Tips to Make Your Azure Monitor Rock, and I really hope that some of you folks can gain some useful tips and tricks to help you along your cloud monitoring journey. So let's get into it and let's see what we can learn today. So Azure Monitor tip number 1, sign up to Azure. If you or your organization have not yet signed up to Azure, or you're just worried or concerned that maybe Azure Monitor is not going to be the monitoring solution of choice for you, well, if you use the link that I've provided here in this slide, you can sign up for free. You'll get 12 months free access, $200 worth of free Azure credit, or whatever the local currency equivalent is in your region. That will also give you free usage of over 25 Azure services, one of which is Azure Monitor. And then all you need to do is deploy an Azure Log Analytics workspace, which is the foundation and building block of getting started with Azure Monitor. And from there, just make sure that you select the free pricing tier as I've shown here in the screenshot. Once you've done that, you're ready to kick the tires with Azure Monitor and move on to tip number 2. Tip number 2, onboarding at scale. Once you have your Log Analytics workspace deployed, you're going to need to bring data into that workspace so you can actually start monitoring it and crunching the data. So to do that, the quickest and easiest way would be to look at what virtual machines, for example, you have deployed in your Azure tenant across your subscriptions. If you've got existing workloads there that are not being monitored by Azure Monitor, you've got two ways really to bring them in. You can then either download the customized PowerShell script that comes as part of the Log Analytics workspace. You could run that script. It contains your subscription ID, your Log Analytics workspace ID, and some other custom parameters. You could download that script from Azure and deploy it one by one onto each of your servers. It's not really a scale model. It's a slow method of doing it. If it works for some people, great. But really the smart way to do it would be to do it at scale using Azure Policy. And Azure Policy has the concept of initiatives. And you can see here in the slide, there's a built-in initiative. So it's native to Azure. It's out of the box, simply called Enable Azure Monitor for VMs. And that initiative has 10 policy definitions as part of it. And when you choose to deploy that initiative, you can target that at your management group level or your subscription level, so you can capture all virtual machines under each of those logical organizational units. And from there, the initiative has a bunch of different individual definitions, policy definitions, some of which you can see here in the screenshot. And each of those have an effect type of deploy if not exists. So essentially what that means is if you have existing virtual machines deployed in your Azure environment and you have enabled the Azure Monitor initiative at your subscription or management group level, well then every one of these definitions will check with each virtual machine, Windows or Linux. It will check to see if they're compliant or not. And if they are not compliant, you'll have an option to remediate the workload, so you can then automatically onboard using Azure Policy the Log Analytics extension, which is essentially the agent that you need to bring up into Azure Monitor. And once deployed, it will automatically do it to every virtual machine in that subscription or under that management group, and it is nice and easy without any issue. Obviously go through your standard change process first to make sure you get approval from your change admin and your change team, but it's a much cleaner and much more centralized manner in which you need or can bring those agents up into Azure Monitor. There's more information on the link here, and this is definitely one of our top tips for onboarding up into Azure Monitor. Use the policy. Don't use the PowerShell. It's just a little bit long-winded and can be a little bit problematic as well. This particular tip will also ensure that any new workloads that you deploy into that same subscription or into that same management group because the policy initiative is applied at that level, any new workloads that you bring in that do not have the Azure Monitor agent will automatically then onboard in using the policy definitions that are in there. So definitely a really good tip to take on board and bring that monitoring data into your centralized log analytics workspace. The next tip I wanted to talk to you about is about connecting your hybrid workloads into Azure Monitor. So if you've not heard of a service called Azure Arc, you should definitely look into it. Check out the link I've got here in the slide. So Azure Arc is a service in Azure that will extend your on-premises workloads or your even workloads located in different clouds like AWS, Google, Alibaba, whatever. Once you can deploy the Azure Arc agent to a server in any of those scenarios, you can then bring that server into Azure as a visible resource that Azure can apply monitoring data to, policy and governance, even update management to. So Azure Arc as a driver for extending your Azure Monitor service to those hybrid workloads is a really, really great solution for you to use, and I would totally encourage you to look into it and to connect it back to your Azure Monitor workspace. Alternatively, if you or your organization has made investments with System Center Operations Manager, you can leverage the System Center Operations Manager agent, which is known as the Microsoft Monitoring Agent, but it's also the same agent type that Log Analytics uses for Azure Monitor. So if you have already deployed SCOM, as it's known as well, to your on-prem environment, and you've got a bunch of servers reporting into SCOM, you can configure those servers to also communicate or multi-home to your Azure Monitor workspace up in the cloud. So it brings an extension of your on-prem up to Azure, so that's your hybrid scenario, but it also then enables you to view and to work with the alerts that SCOM generates on-prem up in Azure Monitor through one of the alert solutions and the log analytics views as well. So that's another really good solution if you've got it. You know, people often ask me, particularly with my previous background with SCOM, people often ask me, is SCOM dead? What are we going to do? Is Azure Monitor a replacement for it? And I say, at least for now, it's definitely not a direct replacement for it, but it would be wise if you already have SCOM and you're investing in it, or you're considering investing in it, to connect that SCOM management group and environment up to your Azure Monitor workspace, because it gives you that extended capability across your cloud. Tip number 4, before we go into a demo. So tip number 4 is to use dashboards. And by dashboards, I mean the Azure Dashboard service. So not a lot of people use this service, which is kind of weird because it's free and it can be really, really useful. So what you do, the example you see here, I've added in a bunch of different dashboard widgets, essentially HTML widgets that come natively out of the box with Azure Dashboards. And I've basically, across my Azure tenant, multiple subscriptions are involved in this. I've added in different dashboard widgets so I can get that centralized view, or at least chase that utopian scenario of one central pane of glass, if there is even such a thing. But you can customize this to any way that you want that suits you and suits your business. You can also modify the dashboards for different business units, different departments. You can share them, clone them. There's so much you can do with Azure Dashboards. And if you've not used them before and you want to get started, I've included a link to a nice handy walkthrough tutorial on the official Microsoft Docs site for this as well. So in the next section, we're going to do a demo. And in the demo, I'm going to show you a little bit around Azure Dashboards and how that pivots into, or how it can be used to pivot into, some of the scenarios and some of the tips that I've previously mentioned up to this point. So this is my Azure Dashboard. So I've just created a fictional dashboard here for my Cloud Management Corp. You can see I've got a bunch of different widgets here. Some of them are static images. Some of them are reaching out. If I go to edit this, you'd see some of them are reaching out to external sources. I'm pulling in just some HTTP weather information here just to get the weather in my local area here in Ireland. Others are connected to things referred to in Azure Monitor or Log Analytics as solutions. And then we've got some more familiar areas like, for example, Azure Activity Logs, where if I click in here, for example, this will bring me up the Azure Activity Logs. This is actually a solution. I can see all of the various activity log data that my specific subscription is bringing up for me, so or is highlighting for me. So that's really good. If I go back to my dashboard, if I have a look at, let's say, admin events, so this is looking at the raw Azure Activity Log. So you can see some administration events here on my specific subscription. Or I can go and I can have a look at, we mentioned Azure Arc earlier. So these are some of my Arc servers. So if I click on, say, this one, sorry, if I go here, so these servers are all on-prem. So if I click on this one here, just give me some screen, we can see here that this server is, for example, a HP ProLiant DL385G6. So that's a physical server sitting in my demo data center in Dublin, Ireland. Yet I've got this connected directly up to my Azure subscription, and from here, because Azure, essentially Azure Arc tricks Azure into believing that this physical server on-prem is actually an Azure server, and because of that, I now have access to these additional capabilities from Azure that I can then apply, and I can manage this workload with, so this server. So if we have a look from purely from a monitoring context, because I deployed the Azure Arc agent to that specific server, I can then onboard the monitoring agent like I showed in the onboarding tip earlier on, and from here I can get full monitoring data for that specific on-premises server directly from the comfort of my Azure environment, which is pretty cool. There's a bunch of other stuff I could do. I could look at change tracking here, so this will show me any changes that occur or potentially occur on that server, so I can see specific services, Windows services, if any of them were modified or updated. I can get an inventory of applications, which will give me all of this information, all the relevant information that I need to understand if there was a problem. Update management, if I had that configured, this would provide updates, Windows updates essentially, to my workload. Or I can even apply Azure policies, so where I can leverage policies from my Azure tenant and I can push them down to my on-prem servers as well, so I can get compliance information about those policies. And each of these additional operations are all underpinned by the Log Analytics workspace that is a part or a pillar, if you like, of Azure Monitor. So that's pretty cool. If I go back to my dashboard, so if we looked at Arc, we also spoke about System Center Operations Manager, or SCOM. So there's a solution here for Log Analytics. If I click on this, this will show me a solution called Alert Management. And these are alerts that my on-premises SCOM environment is picking up from all the on-prem workloads, which is not just servers. It's going to pick up network devices, UPS, air conditioning units, pretty much everything related to my on-prem monitoring. And from there, I can get full visibility of all of the different workloads and alerts that my on-prem environment knows about up in my Azure Monitor workspace. So this is pretty cool too. If we go back to dashboard again, I can see any of these widgets here can be customized, but maybe, for example, I want to edit it. So if I edit, you can add in some default tiles from the tile gallery. So you can add in your metrics charts, resource groups, clocks, all that type of stuff. You can even, down here, you can add in some ARM data and ARM actions as well. So it's super, super customizable. There's also options to create multiple different dashboards. So this little icon here denotes that this dashboard is a shared dashboard. So I can share this with my work colleagues if I want. But maybe I just want a specific dashboard for maybe a web application that I'm working on that's only managed by me. I can go in here, or on my PaaS workloads, or I might want an Azure inventory dashboard. So this is a community solution that's available on the community GitHub resource. I've got a link to it later in the presentation. And this specific dashboard, again, uses widgets, but it calls data from the Azure Resource Graph. And the Azure Resource Graph, sorry, if I go into this here, the Azure Resource Graph Explorer essentially leverages the KQL, or the Kusto query language, that underpins the Log Analytics workspace and that drives the Log Analytics workspace. And from there you can create your charts and your monitoring data, which can then, as you know, or as you see, be added into your dashboard views here, which is really great. So there's plenty of options or opportunities that you can do with you can leverage with your dashboard scenarios. I tend to use it from a management perspective, so I put the widgets in here that are relevant to my day-to-day management of my Azure environment, and as I need to, I can just click on one of these and then just pivot directly in and start managing that environment. So really neat feature. And if you're not using Azure Dashboards already, I really do encourage you to play around with it and see what you think. Let's move on to the next tip. So our next tip is to take advantage of two features in Azure Monitor specifically targeted at your alert data. So any monitoring solution will generate a bunch of alerts and a bunch of notifications based on the data that you've asked it to monitor. Not all of those alerts and notifications are going to be relevant to you or to your business, and so you're going to need to fine-tune or override even those alerts to either change the severity. So you might get an alert that is that fires as a critical alert, but to you and your business it's not that critical. It might be just an informational alert, or it might just not be relevant at all, and you might want to just turn off that alert and just completely stop it from annoying you or waking up your service desk team in the middle of the night. So what we have in Azure Monitor is we've got two really neat features. One is called Smart Groups, and Smart Groups allows you to centrally manage your alert lifecycle by basically suppresses a bunch of rules. So if you have one monitoring rule that it fires 1,000 times in one night, with Smart Groups, Azure Monitor automatically groups those alert rules into one single smart group, so you can see domain controller event ID 1234, for example, and if that fired 1,000 times during the night, you'll just see one smart group with the name of that particular alert rule and the instance count of the number of alerts. So it just makes even the alert tuning experience a lot easier to manage, because you're not looking at a screen full of hundreds or thousands of alerts at one time. So it's really, really good. There's also a really cool new feature. It's in preview at the moment, but I'll show it to you in the demo now in a few minutes. And it's basically gives you an option to enable maintenance mode in your Azure Monitor environment. And this was a big ask. So with Azure Monitor, you could get all the alerts, but typical monitoring tools like SCOM, where you could put your servers, like a bunch of servers, into maintenance mode during your organization's patching windows, for example, you could not do that easily with Azure Monitor. So we now have new alert suppression rules available to us, where we can essentially emulate a maintenance mode scenario, or any scenario where you need to suppress rules. So that's a really cool one. Then we've got a feature called dynamic thresholds. And dynamic thresholds, essentially it's using behind the scenes, it's using machine learning from the Azure platform. And this is one of the added benefits you get when you go for a cloud native monitoring product like Azure Monitor. So with dynamic thresholds, Azure Monitor uses machine learning to learn the signal behavior It then automatically adjusts the thresholds of your monitor based on what it defines are the relevant, if you like, quiet times, busy times, learning your patterns like your holidays, downtime, expected outages basically. And it will automatically, based on how you initially configure it of course, but it will automatically learn the behavior of your monitored environment, and it will dynamically tune those alerts for you. So if you have, for example, a random CPU spike in one of your VMs and it's on a certain day or a certain time every week or every month, over a period of time, Azure Monitor will learn that and will know that, very quickly, once that CPU spikes, it knows that it's going to drop back down to median levels. And as a result, it will automatically tune the alert so it doesn't bother you with it. It ignores it basically, or it at least accommodates and accounts for it. Instead of having you or someone on the service desk team have to come in and constantly tune and look at it as a false positive, because obviously the issue would have self-remediated by the time somebody probably gets to look at it. So that's a really, really neat feature as well. And I would totally recommend for Azure Monitor, particularly with alerting, make sure that you use smart groups to the best of your advantage, and also look at dynamic tuning. I'll show both of these features in the next demo shortly. So the next tip, and this is a fairly basic one, and if you've ever used Log Analytics, if you've been using it for any period of time, you'll probably have come across this, but it's such a simple thing to get, I won't say wrong, but to miss. So what I would recommend is when you are using a Log Analytics workspace, and if you are running your own custom queries, or if you've copied a query from, I don't know, a community repo or somewhere like that, always make sure that your scope is set correctly, because by default the scope in Log Analytics is set to the Log Analytics workspace by default, and that's fine. For most queries that's fine, and if you use the sample queries that come out of the box with your Log Analytics workspace, the majority of them will auto scope and there's no problem. But if you find that you have queries that either you've created yourself, so you've started your KQL or your custom query language learning journey, or somebody has shared a query from a community website or blog, and when you copy it into the Log Analytics workspace and try and run it, if it returns no data, it doesn't necessarily mean that your query is incorrect. It's quite possible that the scope that you've set your workspace for is just not scoped at the correct model, or the correct class rather. So that's definitely something to look at, and just remember that different scopes or scope types present different sample queries and obviously have different available log data depending on what way you want it. So I'd always say, get started with, use the sample queries that are there, have a look at what way they're scoped and what way they work. You've got an opportunity to save those queries then, and then you can kind of just go forward from that. But it is something that a bunch of new starters with Azure Monitor and Log Analytics will find. You'll probably get this issue at some point, and just be aware it could be something as simple as just changing your scope. Okay, next tip, work with workbooks. So workbooks are the reporting engine, if you like, for Azure Monitor. So with on-premises monitoring tools such as SCOM, our typical reporting engine would be something like SQL reporting services, or other products might use Power BI or their own reporting engine. But ultimately, they would have their own reporting engine, and you can extract your reports and schedule them. It's very traditional methodology of monitoring for when you use on-premises tools. In Azure, it's slightly different, and Azure Monitor was lacking a defined reporting solution for quite some time. And then about a couple of years ago, Microsoft introduced the Workbooks service as a preview. And over the last couple of years, they have definitely enhanced the Workbooks experience. They've added to it. It's based on a service, an open source service called Jupyter. and you can either leverage the native workbooks that are available to you as soon as you launch into Azure Monitor, or you can create your own ones. You can even pull from community galleries and repos as well. So there's a lot of stuff that there's a lot of resources rather where you can get access to these workbooks, and they will provide essentially visual reporting from inside the Azure portal. The nice thing about workbooks, in the same way that with on-premises reporting or traditional reporting, you can join or you can integrate data from multiple sources. So one workbook does not have to be specific to one resource. It can have multiple resources do the work for you as well and present that data back in an easy to consume format directly from the Azure portal. So that's a really cool feature. There's also a bunch of different visualizations that you can choose from, depending on what it is that you want to report on. You can have all types of visualizations that are native and out of the box, and you can combine some of those visualizations and edit those reports or those workbooks in a very similar manner to how you could edit the dashboards that I demonstrated earlier. You can also edit your own custom workbooks, and you can augment them with queries, and you can get really customized with these reports as well. So I've just put a link in the bottom of the slide here, like I have done with most of the other slides. If you want to get started with Azure Monitor workbooks, that's a good place to have a look, and I'll show you some of them in the demo now in just a moment. So for this demo, we're back at our Azure Dashboard. And what we're going to do is, from here, we can go into any one of these icons here. If I'd set one of these up for Azure Monitor, we could just pivot in. But just to show, in case anybody is watching this and actually doesn't know how to access Azure Monitor, if you just go up to the search bar at the top of the Azure portal, type in Monitor, like such, click on it, and that will bring you to the Azure Monitor overview blade. From here on the left hand side, you can see that there are a bunch of different features that you can click into, and you can work depending on what your requirements are. For this demo, I'm going to just show you some of the features that we spoke about alerting. So first up, on the alerts view, we can see here we've got a centralized collection, or centralized view rather, of the different alert severities in my Azure tenant. So I say tenant because I've got a bunch of subscriptions up here already selected. I can select over time range, resource type, resource group. I've just got pretty much everything in my environment. And we can see here that I've got a couple of critical, a few error, some warning. This is just a demo environment. If this was an enterprise environment, I could have potentially thousands of alerts in here across each severity category. So to help with that, smart groups. So if we click on the smart groups view here, we can see each of the individual alerts in my environment are listed by name, but we can see here an alert count. So this one here, for example, this has come from my on-premises SCOM integration. This one here has 43 alerts. So instead of Azure Monitor generating 43 instances of that alert, it just presents to me one specific group. Likewise here, if I click into this one, there's 3 instances of it here, but I can see that they're all gathered together, and then I can basically fine tune this. I can change alert states. So this is me performing essentially overrides or alert tuning in Azure Monitor. So I can acknowledge, I can close it. It's basically changing the resolution state. I can even change the smart group state, so the state of the overall smart group. So if I just wanted to validate or change the resolution state for every alert in that specific smart group, I can do that easily just by clicking on the change smart group option, smart group state option here. If I want a history, that's just showing me there was a smart group created, but if there was a more granular history around that, I get all of that here. So it's Azure Monitor is starting to become that mature monitoring solution in the cloud that we've become accustomed to with some of the more traditional on-premises tools as well. So if we go back here to alerts, and if we then have a look at alert rules, and if I select just to show you the dynamic tuning. So this is a sample rule I just created for the purpose of this demo. It's just looking at the CPU the CPU percentage of a specific virtual machine. So if I click in here to the actual condition, the default option for rules, alert rules, is set to static. So here I would traditionally put in if the CPU is greater than a specific, let's say 90%, then go and perform these actions for me. And we can see here, by the way, so Azure Monitor automatically presents to me what the actual values are and have been over a defined period of time. In this case, 6 hours. And then up here, this shows me the point where I can actually stop, and I can create the threshold for. But from a dynamic perspective, what we want to do is if we select the dynamic option, we can then have dynamic thresholds look at this over a period of time. We can say select the average aggregation type and set the threshold sensitivity to high, medium or low. And then basically machine learning behind the scenes will work with Azure Monitor to configure that alert and to define whether or not over a number of, for example, violations and a specific defined period of time, if that's something that it should ignore, or if it's something that it should present back to you as a specific alert issue that you might need to worry about. So that's dynamic thresholds, another really neat feature of Azure Alerting. And then finally, on the alerting side of things, this is the new preview feature. It's called Alert Processing Rules. So if we click into Alert Processing Rules, I've created a demo rule here. So we can click on this demo rule. And from here, I've added a bunch of servers. And let's say, for example, I don't want to be notified when any of these servers generate a severe or an alert with a severity of, say, warning, informational and verbose. So I only want to be told when it's a critical or an error alert, right? So I've selected the servers or the workloads. Go to my next setting here, which would be suppression. I could also invoke an action group if there was an additional action I wanted. And then I specify my timeline. So I'm going to say repeat every day between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. for example. And from there, I can specify where and what I want to do with it. I can add my tags. I can review. And because the rule type is suppression, it's going to suppress those specific, any alerts that are generated with that severity that matches. It's going to suppress them between this window, essentially emulating a maintenance mode feature in that you would have with your traditional on-premises monitoring tools. So another really neat feature. It's relatively new. It's still in preview, but if maintenance mode is something that you or your business are looking for from Azure Monitor and you're not aware of it, well, this is the feature for you. So our next Azure Monitor tip is to dive deep with Insights. So Insights is a feature of Azure Monitor. There are multiple insights that you can choose to work with. You don't have to work with all of them, but some of my favorite ones are virtual machine insights. So in the example here, you can see some charts around performance, where we can get near real-time monitoring of your core KPIs, your core components like your CPU, memory, disk, network, that type of stuff. And you can also get some deep health diagnostics extracted from the virtual machine with the Azure Monitor or Log Analytics agent, but presented to you in a nice, easy to understand format in the form of virtual machine insights. Moving away from virtual machines and looking at applications, there's another insight feature called or named Application Insights. And with Application Insights, you can target Azure Monitor at your web applications, or maybe they're not yours, your organization's web applications. And this is a really great tool, particularly if you're like me and you're an IT pro. And I'm not a developer, and I don't do .NET, and I don't do JavaScript and Node.js and these type of development languages. They're outside my comfort zone. However, I certainly have, if they live in Azure, I certainly have a responsibility to monitor those web applications. And my preferred method to monitor them is to use the Application Insight service. And what that will give me is, it will allow me to deep dive into the code. So if there are performance issues with an application, App Insights will deep dive into the code, and it will then present back to me as the monitoring administrator. It will present back to me a stack of code, or maybe a line of code, where Application Insights feels that the performance issue, or maybe the exception is popping its head up, if you like, inside the application. And what I can do as a pure IT pro is I can then take that notification, and I can take that information, and I can go back to my development team, and I can have a nice civil conversation with them. I don't want to go pointing fingers, they don't want to go pointing fingers, but we certainly need to work together to figure out where the problem is. And instead of the old story of, it's not my web application, it's your infrastructure, and then the IT pros saying it's not my infrastructure, it's your application, App Insights will give us that code level view where we can have a constructive conversation with the developer, and we can say, look, there's the line of code. I don't know what it means, but my Application Insights tool is telling me that that's where the problem is. And more often than not, the developer can then investigate using his own tools or her own tools. They can extract the information directly from App Insights, or they can work inside it. They can integrate that information into the development tools and the troubleshooting tools that they're more familiar with to start their debugging and their profiling. And it just brings that whole DevOps story together. It just makes life a lot easier for both sides of the IT spectrum. So the developers and the IT pros can happily work together using App Insights. And for a long time, it's probably been one of my favorite features of Azure Monitor, and something that when people ask me, is Azure Monitor better than SCOM, or what can it do better than SCOM? In my view, it does Application Insights, which is application performance monitoring, essentially, much, much better than what we can get with on-premises SCOM. So really, really good insight. And if you've not used this one, have a look at the link below here, and that will give you a list of all of the insights that are available inside Azure Monitor. And from there, you can get more information on which ones might interest you, which ones might be relevant to your business, and then which ones you might want to get started with to begin with. Another tip would be to use a feature of Azure Monitor called Service Map. And Service Map is a really, really great feature of Azure Monitor where you can deploy the Service Map dependency agent. It's referred to as the dependency agent to your virtual machines. And your virtual machine will then map out inside the Azure portal, will map out all of the different dependencies that it is communicating with, and all of the endpoints that are communicating back in and out to that workload. So for example, a lot of us would have probably a memory, or maybe it's still real world, where you've got a server, maybe an old server sitting under a desk or sitting in a comms room or a data center. It's been plugged in years. Nobody knows really what's happening with it, but nobody wants to turn it off. And those were scenarios that were very real a number of years ago. And if you had a tool like Service Map where you could deploy the dependency agent to a server such as that and have it map out all of the endpoints that it's communicating with, very quickly you build up a picture of what that specific workload is communicating with, and whether or not it's relevant, or whether or not it's applicable to shut that machine down, or to at least add it into a different kind of administration or management group. From a migration scenario, so never mind specific dependency mapping for a what's happening monitoring perspective, if you're involved in migrating workloads up into Azure, specifically lift and shift scenarios, then the Service Map feature is built into the Azure Migrate service. So if we do an assessment, if we perform an assessment of Azure Migrate on, let's say, a bunch of on-premises servers, or a bunch of servers sitting in AWS, for example, then the Service Map feature will map out all of the endpoints and the dependencies that each individual server is communicating with. What that then does is that gives us the ability to understand Well, if it's, for example, a back-end database server, we'll need to ensure that if it's communicating with multiple front-end servers and nobody knew about this, then we can add them into a migration group, and we can ensure that when we go and we do that lift and shift migration, that we move them all together and we consider them all as one workload or one unit rather than individual separate workloads, where without a dependency mapping tool like this, you might have a scenario whereby one component of your IT service, if you like, is sitting in the cloud and another one is sitting, miles and miles away on-prem. So really gives that open visibility of what your workloads are communicating with, and ultimately will also highlight some issues if there's any communication problems too. So we're going to do a little demo. I'm going to walk through in the demo some of the application insights and some of the virtual machine insights and the other insights. So some of my favorite ones that I use on a regular basis. And we won't have time to go through every single one of them that are available, but hopefully it'll give you a good feeler and a good idea for what it is that you might need to do in your own environment. So back in Azure, what we're going to do is we're going to stay in Azure Monitor, and probably notice over here in the navigation pane, we've got a whole bunch of insights that we can choose from. So we can see here, there's application insights, virtual machines. We can get insights on storage accounts, containers, networks, key vaults, a lot of kind of standard workloads that most organizations would deploy on even some of their early journey into Azure as well. So if we look at, say, application insights, I'll start with that. I've got a basic demo application here, and this demo application is basically sitting on, it's fairly basic, it's sitting on an app service in my Azure environment, and it's presented out to the world, public facing. Okay, so here I can see all of the various requests that come into this application. I can get an application map. Let me just get some more real estate, and this is only a super basic app, so there's not much here. But what I like and what I can get, so if I click on, for example here, these are availability tests that I've configured. You can see that I've got tests in the US and Europe. So if I had users in the US and my application is based in Europe, that will give me a success rate. It'll tell me if I can drill into it here, it will tell me my European tests. There are some from France, from North Europe and West Europe, and then from the US. They're all hitting 100%, so that's all good. If I had performance issues with this application, maybe out of the US and it was hosted in Dublin, Ireland, say in North Europe, I'd see the performance issues here, and then I'd have the capability to drill a bit deeper and work with the application developers and try and get a solution to that problem to ensure that my US users, for example, are not put out and that their experience with the app is pretty much the same as what it should be for everyone else. If I look at some of the other features here, right? So there's a usage feature. This is pretty cool. So most application developers will want to know who's using their application, from where, and how. Now, again, this is only a basic demo app, and I only have it up a week or two. But we can see here, 4 users have used it. So it's a good job I'm not running my own business, my own bakery business. But if I click on View More Insights, what this is going to do is it's going to provide to me, here we go, it's going to provide to me a bunch of stats about this application. I can see here, there's been users from the United States have actually hit this website. Ireland, that would be expected. Germany, my German friends are obviously trying to maybe see what an Irish bakery is like. Republic of Moldova, interesting, and even Israel. So if I'm a developer, or maybe just the application owner, I can see that all of these states or these countries are accessing my application while it's sitting here in my Azure tenant. I can see the version of Windows or the OS version. I can even see browser versions that's hitting my application as well. So from a user perspective, and remember, I'm an IT pro, so I'm not even a developer, but I can drill down and I can get information on this application very, very easily just by drilling into App Insights. Maybe I want to have a look at some problems. Okay, so maybe somebody's complaining to me about some failures that have happened over the last few weeks, right? So we could have a user might log a ticket. They might say, hey, look, in the last couple of weeks we've had some issues with the application. It's not accessible, or it's been really slow. So I can sort by time. So let's say last 30 days. I can see I've got a storage exception here. Okay, so let's drill into this. And over here, I'm starting to see a bunch of exceptions. And if I click into any of these, now it's drilling down into the code. Again, I'm not a developer, but it's given me the information that I need, the call stack, to go to my development team and say, hey guys, should we have a look at this? Obviously this is just an example, but like it will drill into a bunch of different codes that you don't have to have that experience with. All you have to know is how to onboard that specific application back into Azure Monitor, and then you start getting all of this excellent information back. So that's App Insights. Definitely recommend that. If we look at our virtual machines, so we can see here I've got a bunch of my virtual machines spread across multiple Azure subscriptions. These are being monitored. So if I go into any one of these guys here, I can see enable. This is a nice little UI where you can enable or disable. Remember our earlier tip where, wherever possible, try and always use Azure policy to onboard at scale. So if you have a policy sitting at the subscription level or higher up at the management group level that dictates that all new virtual machines automatically must have the Azure Monitor agent on it, well then they will just light up in here every single time there's an agent deployed. So if I click on one of these guys here, you should see this is the service map feature. Or not. Let's go back. Go back here and we'll pick another one because demo gods. There we go. Okay, cool. So this is the service map feature that we spoke about earlier. So we can see here that the dependency agent has been deployed to my virtual machine. I can view, if I zoom in here, I can view all of the various processes that are running on that machine. As I click on each one, I can see over here, I can see all the information that's relevant to it. I can go to log events if that specific service had a log. I could get additional info. I can see here, so if I zoom back out, I can see here that there are a number of clients communicating with it. Azure doesn't have a DNS reference for this specific client, but it'll still provide me with an IP address. Then I can see all of the various connections that are communicating with it. So if I click on any one of these connections here, let's say port 138, there's a server here, 10.10.0.15. Once I click on the actual link, that link will then show me a health state here, and I can then troubleshoot. So if it was a valid connection that I actually wanted to look at and I wanted to work through, I can then click on it and it'll present back the data to me as well. So that's a nice feature too. There you can see it. Staying here, if I go over to health, so I can get a health tree or a health view if you like, so I can see the virtual machine. These are the different rules, or if you like, acting like monitors. So there's my CPU utilization. Can see the various samples that's been taken. I can get a history, so we can see we had a problem with the CPU utilization at some point, and I can go into configuration. So if you use SCOM, if you're familiar with SCOM, this will look very, very similar to the Health Explorer view that you get with SCOM. You can see there you can expand each one. And on the right hand side here, when we go to configuration, this is where we can perform our alert tuning. So we can say the CPU utilization alert will fire critical when the CPU is utilized over 90%. Maybe I want to add a warning. I say greater than, for example, 75%. Maybe that's an important server. And if I say alert status, then I can alert on it and get that delivered to me in an email. So if I go back here, if I go to performance, we can see the performance view. Consistent. I've got all of those different samples. I've got all of the various, it's an active chart, so I can drill in, I can click through anything that I need here, or I can just use the table. And then underpinning all of these experiences, you can see workbooks. So in the previous demo, we went through workbooks, or we demonstrated workbooks. You can see here, these are custom targeted workbooks. So if I click on performance here, that will then present to me a performance analysis workbook for that specific server over a defined period of time. So you have that nice uniform continuation of monitoring experience as you drill through from the various insights. So if we stick with insights, everyone has storage accounts in their Azure environment. So here you can see natively, so as soon as you deploy a storage account, this clearly doesn't need an agent because a storage account is agentless. But this is using the Azure activity logs and diagnostic logs to get the information up into Azure Monitor relating to your specific storage accounts. So here we can see latency. So maybe if this was like a file share or a critical storage account that was presenting data out to your end users, you can see the latency from a server and an end-to-end perspective as well. So again, another nice little feature. If your organization uses Kubernetes clusters, you can go in and you can actually monitor your clusters. So again, I'm not hugely handy with Kubernetes clusters, but as the monitoring administrator, I can go in here, I can see the performance of all of the relevant cluster components. I can get reports for each component here if I wish. I can look at the nodes, the various metrics, so the performance metrics here. We can see, if I just expand this, we can see here all of the various processes. This is the agent, the log analytics agent. But these are all the different processes that are running on that AKS agent pool. Very little use at all happening with this. It's only a demo environment. But again, nice bit of information that you can pull out of here without having a huge amount of knowledge and understanding of the actual stack that you're monitoring. So it's a good scenario, a good option to have in your toolbox when you want to work with those developers and people within your organization that actually use Kubernetes and containers. Another common one will be key vaults. So most organizations have key vaults. You can see here we've got a bunch of key vaults in our organization. Again, this is just a demo, and we can see requests, timeline, any failures, latency, all that cool stuff as well. So if you want to actually have a look at any additional insights, so obviously you can click on any of these in your environment, and each one potentially is configured differently to the other. But the Insights Hub will give you a list of all of the available insights that you can take advantage of. So Windows Virtual Desktop should be renamed at this point, but that should be for Azure Virtual Desktop. Backup, networks, we didn't speak about that. Service bus, like there's a bunch of other stuff. Azure Stack HCI, if you've got that hybrid connectivity up into the cloud from on-prem. All of those different insights can be onboarded and then can be presented in one easy to consume view from within the Azure portal. Okay, so we'll go back to the deck and we'll move into to the last tip of the day. So final tip of the day is to always try and think outside of the box and use community solutions to enhance your monitoring experience. So my background, as probably a lot of people who know me will know, my background in the Microsoft world has been primarily focused for the last 7, 8, 9 years on System Center, in particular SCOM. And the ecosystem and the community system around System Center and SCOM in general was massive. And many times, if we wanted to monitor a resource with SCOM and there wasn't an official management pack from the vendor or from Microsoft available to monitor the workload that we needed, somebody in the community would step up and they would create a custom management pack and they'd offer it out for free, and you could just import it and all was good. So the same community spirit and the same community ethos is readily available in the Azure Monitor community. And one such community member and a really good friend of mine from Australia, my friend Tao Yang, only recently announced a really cool community solution that ties in nicely to this presentation for Azure Monitor. And it solves a scenario whereby if you use Azure Policy, which you should, so if you deploy Azure, you should engage Azure Policy and have it assigned at all of your different management group and subscription tiers in some way, shape or form. So if you go under the assumption that every Azure environment should have Azure Policy applied, Azure Policy is great at doing what it says, at restricting, at auditing, at providing compliance, but it's not great on notifying you externally. So you have to, if you want to know if a resource is not compliant, for example, then you need to go into the Azure Policy blade in the portal and you need to understand if that's compliant or not. That's all well and good if you're in the portal every day, but particularly if you've got a DevOps mindset, you might not be in the portal much, or if you've just got other things to do, you're not going to leave the Azure portal open all day. So to solve that problem, Tao put together a really cool solution where you can have, and you can see this is his whiteboard that he put up an example of on his blog post, which is linked below there. So in this solution, Tao has put together all of the various components in Azure that are required to extract the data from Azure Policy non-compliance alerts, non-compliance activities, and push them into an event grid, use a function, pass that into an Azure Monitor alert via Log Analytics, and then leverage an action group, which in my scenario, I've used an email action in my action group to basically send me an email to notify me of the specific non-compliance issue and the resource that's non-compliant. So it's a really great tool, and I'll give you a little quick exclusive demo on it now shortly. But if you want to know anything about that solution, I really encourage you to check out Tao's blog post listed here, read through it in detail, and you won't go wrong. He's detailed the post really well, but it's, in my view, this is an essential community solution that most organizations should put into their Azure environment when they're using Azure Policy. So before I go into the demo, just to show some additional community resources outside of just Tao, because we've got a big community in the Azure Monitor space. So there's a community GitHub that's linked there. That's an official GitHub hosted by Microsoft. So there's a lot of community samples and scripts and workbooks, and there's loads of cool stuff on there. So go have a look. It's free. You might have noticed or heard me speak on and off about Kusto Query Language, or KQL. So that is the official language that underpins Log Analytics in Azure Monitor. If you want to be any way good with Azure Monitor, any way comprehensive, well then you need to learn KQL. You don't need to get to ninja level, that would be useful, but you do need to learn it and get comfortable with it. So if to get started, I'd suggest read through the official Microsoft KQL documentation. Then an old MVP friend who's now working over in Microsoft in the US, he's hung up his MVP badge. He's now working very closely with Kusto and Azure Monitor. But his blog, cloudsma.com, there's some really great KQL resources on there, so totally recommend to have a look at that. And then another community member from back in the System Center days, Rod Trent. So Rod is now focused on he works in Microsoft, and he's focused on Azure Sentinel, should I say Microsoft Sentinel, the rebrand. And Sentinel also uses KQL. So Rod has just recently started putting together a really cool series of posts called Must Learn KQL. And if you have the time, I would totally recommend that you spend some time reading through Rod and Billy's posts and resources, and of course the official Microsoft documentation as well. Okay, so we'll go into a final demo, and I'm just going to give a quick overview of Tao's Azure Policy non-compliance alerting solution. So back in the Azure portal, I'm here at the Azure Policy view or blade. So you can see here in my demo environment, I've applied a couple of initiatives. So these initiatives, there's one there, a security controls one that has 22 non-compliant resources. 22 non-compliant resources and 6 compliant policies. So I need to know. So obviously I can see it from here. If I'm looking at my compliance view, I can see from here what's compliant or non-compliant. But I need to know about that. I need to be able to see that when I'm not in the portal. And to do that with Tao's policy, with Tao's solution rather, let me just show you this one. So I just followed Tao's instructions pretty much verbatim from his blog post and got this up and running in about an hour or so. So in here we can see this is the function. He's created a function called Policy Monitor, and in here this is constantly monitoring for non-compliance issues. So these events here will pull up non-compliance issues as they come through. You can see there's a bit of Python in there, which is way above my knowledge scope, but it's pulling in that information into Event Grid. It's presenting it back to Log Analytics. So actually, let's go to Log Analytics. Let's have a quick look. Let me go to this one. Let me just show you a little bit about KQL. So in here, if I go policy, so this is the query or a query that we can use, that Tao has provided, that we can use to parse. It basically uses a custom log in Azure Policy or Azure Log Analytics rather, and that custom log will query your Azure Policy for all of the various non-compliance events. So you can see here all of this information is provided to me. I've got my provider, I've got the resource that's non-compliant, and that's all great, but obviously I want to get that in an alert. So to do that, Tao's solution has configured an alert to fire. I could probably tidy up this header a little bit better, but an alert to fire when events or policies are non-compliant. It will fire out, will give me a severity, so I can define the severity. It will show me the workload, the subscription, the rule ID, pretty much all the information that I need to know. And then I can go and I can remediate, or I can go and I can work with the relevant owner of that resource to ensure that we then bring that specific resource back to a compliant standard. Okay, so that was a quick run through of the latest and greatest Azure Monitor community solution. And just to finish off, a look into the future of Azure monitoring. So if you're thinking, well, that all looks cool, but what's coming next? So these are all of the services, or most of the cool services that are currently in preview. So preview being that hopefully over the near term or the short term, that these services will light up as generally available in Azure Monitor. Each of these are an active hyperlink, so if you have this this PowerPoint after this presentation, you can just click on any of these or any of the links throughout the deck, and you'll be brought straight to the location of where these previews are. And finally, something that came up in the public media a few months back, it's something apparently coming out called Microsoft Aquila. And this is something that's really exciting for me, being an old school System Center Operations Manager engineer. And hopefully we'll see something like SCOM in the cloud as essentially a PaaS workload as opposed to an IaaS workload. So the future of monitoring is good. The future of monitoring is strong. And we can only hope that it continues that way, and that you guys learn a little bit more every day, every week, and it brings you further along on your cloud monitoring journey. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed today's presentation, and I hope you learned a bunch of new stuff about Azure Monitor. I wanted to say a quick thank you to Richard and Gregor for organising the Festive Tech Calendar event. I really love the Christmas spirit and the diversity of all of the different community presentations that we've seen so far in the month of December, and we still have so much more to go. Also, if you haven't yet contributed to the Girls Who Code charity, please see if you can dig deep and contribute to what is inevitably a fantastic cause. Alright folks, I'm going to sign out. Have a great Christmas, and we hope to see you all in person again soon. Bye bye.